All right. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back. Blizzard's gone crazy. They've just pushed the public tester on the PTR. That's right, the test patch. Zero warning, zero iteration for 3 weeks. They did a little adjustment to it a few days ago. Then they did like a little ghost update to that where they adjusted some of the adjustments. And then if just a few days later, people have barely even tried that. They're like, by the way, it's live. It's on the live ladder. And you're just like, whoa, really? Okay, Blizzard. Just swinging for the fences right now, going straight to live with a very untested patch due to all of the bugs and things in it. They've also put out a new map pool entirely, which I'm so excited by. I have been craving new maps for months now. I feel like after about 4 or 5 months, I start to get a little tired of the map pool. And when we get here about 9 months into a map pool, getting a fresh 9 maps is just a massively needed breath of fresh air. Now, of course, there's a lot of changes. New ones, old ones, controversial ones, small changes to the mineral values. We're going to go through all of that soon. This one's really big as well. The lava spawn change, which they've adjusted as well from the little test they did a few days ago. But the fact that this is live on ladder has so many people screaming at the top of their lungs going, Blizzard, what the hell are you doing? This is crap. It's barely being tested. We don't like the warp gate change, or we don't like this, or we don't like that, or this just feels kind of half-baked. How can you go from 3.5 weeks of nothing happening, no iteration, no adjustments, tons of bugs, to just dropping this on the live game? So as a content creator who's constantly being asked about it, let's break down my thoughts on that, and then we'll go back to the actual changes themselves after that. So first of all, I believe this patch has some cool ideas. I think warp gate is a mechanic which could have a little bit more thought behind it, a little bit more like, oh, hey, Protoss is strong enough to play a more generically normal game where they're not having to be so vulnerable in certain areas to make up for the fact that they have such extreme mobility mechanics in terms of being able to build units anywhere. Oh, Zerglin's got my main. I can warp in some zealots in the mineral line and defend it, quite easily. Oh, there's a drop in there. I can warp in units or I can recall. Protoss has these mobility mechanics that they just kind of get, and it helps. You could say there's 2 ways of thinking about it. It patches the holes in the rest of Protoss and covers their weaknesses. Or you could say, because these things are so powerful, that's why they made Protoss so weak in these other ways, which gives them these like moments of almost unfair feeling strength. You're like, how is Protoss this good? And then moments of them just crumbling under pressure when they're not quite ready for things as well, where you get a very, I would say, stilted experience with Protoss. So anyway, my point being, things like addressing warp gate, I think are cool ideas. Things like changing the work account, you guys know, I think that's a cool idea. I love the pacing change when you go down in the work account. I really enjoy that pacing change. This patch also has a lot of things that I'm very unsure about. I like the idea of changing warp gate. I like the idea of changing the mineral values on the bases and the work account. But I personally had completely different mineral values that I advocated for on the bases. There's different issues with these. I wouldn't personally go after Warpgate because I feel like it's so integral. I had people say, oh, this is your change, Pig. I heard you talk about wanting to remove Warpgate one time. And I was like, what are you guys talking about? I literally talked about how it would be really fun to experiment with changing Protoss to not be as reliant on Warpgate and move that strength into other areas would be a really cool way to redesign the faction. And I just think would make it a bit more StarCraft 1 Protoss style, which I think is cool. It's a little bit more frontally fighting and map control-y and stuff like that. I just like, that style of play. And then I also, in the same video I talked about this about a year ago, I was like, but I probably wouldn't touch it because it's so integral to the cool factor of Protoss and the identity of that faction. So, and it's such a complicated thing. Trying to balance a change like that in a game as complex as StarCraft is so difficult. Like, I probably wouldn't touch it with a 40-foot pole, I'm like, it's just a very complicated change. So anyway, to summarize all this, my point is there's a lot of changes which are cool ideas. I'm not sure at all about the implementation. Sometimes I'm not just not sure, I'm incredibly critical of the implementation. What has me incredibly worried is, of course, the lack of communication from Blizzard and slow iteration on the PTR. We have had over 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks, close to a month of no updates on the PTR, bizarre changes like Warp Gate on Gateway, Orbital Command Center giving free supply, Vipers not being able to abduct siege tanks in the patch where they were meant to be able to abduct siege tanks again, reverting the silly change in the previous patch. The changeling bug, they were doing damage to things. There's so many weird bugs and things, and just no change for over 3 weeks on the PTR was really frustrating to the point where no one was playing it really for the last week and a half or so. There's so few people playing the PTR, and it was just a big testing window that I feel got completely wasted. Now, out of the blue, we get a PTR update just a few days ago, and then bam, it's live on the ladder, zero warning, no communication. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think it's good to test things on the live game because you actually get way more people playing it of all different skill levels. You collect so much more information. That's awesome. Let's do that. Let's also, if we're going to do that, actually have a commitment to do follow-up patches. Right now, there's no communication out of the blue. Like, is there anything on here that actually says it's just like, hey guys, it's released, map pool, economy updates, balance changes with expanding strategic variety across all 3 races, overall quality of life improvements. Here's the map pool update. Okay. Are you going to follow this up? Like, is there there's no word here saying, hey, we understand these are some big changes. We're gonna patch this a week from now and fix the most egregious problems and continue to monitor balance as we go. There's nothing. There's no communication at all on this. And that's what drives me up the wazoo. It makes me go, and it makes everyone in the community go, oh my God, are they just going to drop this and disappear? Because in the past, don't get me wrong, the last patch, they at least came back, fixed all the bugs really quickly, the best they've done in years. But there was still a bunch of decisions in there people largely were against in the community. Most people didn't like, especially the 25 hit points on the Ghost, the Vipers not being able to abduct siege tanks, I think were pretty universally disliked. Both of those changes. And they were just kind of in there, and then bam, they've gone. They've come back now 9 months later. Time for more big changes. And there is, I think, especially with the PTR not being updated at all, there is a real lack of trust in a Blizzard who doesn't communicate their intent about whether or not they're actually going to continue to iterate. So essentially there's 2 paths, guys. Blizzard iterates, they release a patch in 1 week, adjusting things. A patch a week after that, another patch 2 weeks after that, adjusting these things, big changes where they're really actively absorbing all the information they're getting from the live game testing, from the tournaments being played, and fixing it and adjusting as they go. That would be amazing. If that's the case, I will be so excited, so happy. I think it's really cool to have big changes, ambitious changes, when you've got the support from a company who's actively watching things, adjusting things, and trying to fine tune those. Even at the end of the day, in that good case scenario, I'm sure there'd be changes I disagree with, that I'm critical of, but overall, I think it would be a really good positive. Of course, the alternative of them disappearing and not coming back until sometime in 2027 to fix whatever mess gets left here with such a complex set of changes, the stakes are much higher than last season, where they're like, hey, we moved the Ghost around. Hey, Microbial Shroud's a bit different, but we put it behind a Hive Tech upgrade, so you can't even get it for a long time anyway. Like, you know, they did some changes, which at the time we thought were kind of crazy, but they are nothing compared to the absolute breadth of completely redesigning Warp Gate, changing the work account date workers, changing the mineral start, and a bunch of these other changes. Now, if I had to guess, which way are we going, guys? Are we going the dark path? Blizzard drops this and literally just leaves it as is? Or are they going to iterate and do like 3 follow-up patches over the next month? So if I had to guess, it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. I think we'll probably have, essentially, they will do a follow-up patch. They will fix the most egregious problems. They will adjust things that, in their mind, fixes the biggest problems. I don't think it's going to be on the end of, 3 patches in the next month with big changes, really honing in on what are clearly the problems. I hope it's more on that end, but I'd guess it's somewhere in the middle, where they miss the mark on some of the bigger issues. They do fix some of the more egregious ones. The worst, most obvious bugs all get cleaned up. I think they'll do well on the bugs, if I had to guess. Yeah, I'd bet money they do well at cleaning up the bugs, and I think there's a big question mark about whether they have the knowledge, whether we get enough information, whether the communication from the community and from the pros and the tournaments and what we see in those is clear enough in a short time frame to actually adjust things to a state where it's well balanced enough. I think there'd almost be safety and bigger changes where if we changed more things at once, you'd actually have a higher chance of a better outcome. Where if there's enough moving pieces all at once, there's enough kind of things that throw cool new builds, options, and power into multiple factions. As a result, it creates an even bigger meta break, gives strength and options to each faction on a bigger level. Therefore, it avoids, because the worst point, it's not there being imbalance in a patch, it's there being very simple to figure out an obvious imbalance that very clearly favors a very stale meta in a certain direction. And that's always what we're most frustrated and worried by. Oh my god, it's another Ghost late game. Oh my god, it's Broodlord Infest or it's Swarmhost Stalemate. Those are the things where you see the same game over and over that are really toxic for the enjoyment of a strategy game. All right, well anyway, as a person who's now talked about what I'm so worried about and why everyone's so frustrated, myself included, so all I can do, analyze the changes, try to figure them out, break down what the biggest problems are, try to make cohesive arguments about why they should change, how they should change, and also come up with builds to keep the game fun. How do I solve, Mutalisks are too strong, how do I fight that as Terran, how do I fight that as Protoss, this unit's too good, that unit's too good, or how do I, trying to actually understand, break down, analyze, and also think about how these changes will affect the meta, what strategies become stronger, what becomes weaker. Let's get in there and try and understand a little bit. First things first, the 1v1 map pool has 9 new maps, not a moment too soon. I was getting really bored of the previous maps. Notably, Fear and Faith and Old Sun Temple are both 4-player maps, so that's going to be frigging awesome. And of course, I love the Warcraft 3 aesthetic of Blackrock. Absolutely stunning map. Does, in one of the versions, have a spot where you can drop tanks. Oh my god, did they leave that in for the ladder version? I kind of hope they did. I never saw anyone use this in all the tournaments that have been played on this map. Okay, guys, and now for the moment of truth. I've literally just paused recording this so I could go in game on Blackrock and see. Can I do it? All right, I'm gonna let siege. It will. Wait, can I fit 2 tanks on here? Wait, no way. Oh my god, I can't. You can fit 2 tanks up here. Damn, you can probably fit the Widow Mine as well. So for those who don't know, on this map, guys, you've got this here. 1, and then you come up here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 platforms spread throughout the middle of the map. They're not in range of any bases, but you can imagine putting a tank up there against, say, a Zergling Baneling player who's not playing any Ravagers that can snipe it, no Mutalisks, could be really, really annoying. You can also just put Widow Mines up there. Just leave a Widow Mine or 2, units are running past, and they get blasted by them. Just a cool little addition. I asked Clem, I told Clem, I'm like, dude, don't forget you can do this. He didn't remember to do it when he was playing Solar on this map the first time, but I'm hoping we get to actually see this soon. Obviously, some people go, oh, it's grossly overpowered and stuff. I really think there's space for there to be a bit more experimentation with stuff like this that's, yes, very powerful, but you have to work around it. And I think in StarCraft for too long, we've been too afraid to mix these things in. And if we look at it, we can go, okay, in this positioning, it is a bit way too strong. It gets too obnoxious. But I think one map in the pool experimenting with something like this, and then next time we can adjust to go, okay, it should only be the ones on the edge of the map. They still get used sometimes. They're kind of cute, but it's not like insanely frustrating. Turns out these 2 middle ones dominating the map is way too powerful. Or maybe, like many changes, like the healing shrines, which people were losing their minds about. Everyone was saying, there is no way healing shrines are going to be fair. They're going to be so broken. And really, they didn't turn out to be even close to broken. They were largely inconsequential in most of the maps that were played on them. Will this be as inconsequential? I don't know. But I really wish the appetite and the appetite for risk and experimentation was just a little bit higher in StarCraft, so map makers could experiment with things like this and we could try it out on a ladder. Because when you've got a 9-map ladder pool, you can always veto. You can always veto it. If there's 1 or 2 maps that are a little bit more out there, I really don't think that's hurting anyone. Anyways, there's also new team game maps. I'm not too familiar with any of those, so I won't talk about those here. Starting work is reduced from 12 to 8. Okay, so all these changes are the same as my previous PTR video. If you guys didn't see it, we're just going to skim through them. Starting work is reduced from 12 to 8. Large mineral patches down from 1,800 minerals to 1,600 per base. And small mineral patches increased from 900 to 1,100. Now, I believe in the previous version, the original version of the PTR, this was 1,200 minerals. So they've lowered that to 1,100, so there isn't overall more minerals on each base, which you could argue, okay, so this is not as good for turtling players, Skytoss players, you know, turtle mech guys. Still, though, the delay on the first patch mining out, 200 more minerals, it's an extra, I don't know, minute and a half or so, or before that base is actually going to mine out. Because if you think about it, it used to be 900, and that base would mine out between 8.5 to 9 minutes, right? Those first 4 mineral patches. So it's close, it's about a minute and a half, minute 45 extra, which is still pretty damn important in terms of, okay, your economy is not going to drop in terms of the rate of mining as drastically for not getting up a 4th and a 5th base. Still does reward those plays. I'm still a little questioning of it, but I do think this is a step in the right direction. I still kind of wish we just kept the exact legacy of the Void mineral pattern, but you just make the minerals in the main base 1,500 all across, or make them all 1,800. Basically, just let that main base last a bit longer so that 1 and 2 base players, when you are doing really aggressive or high-tech strategies, there's that little bit more room to pivot sideways into extra tech without getting punished for not expanding out of your main so quickly. Now, obviously, the default geysers have gone up. I've said I don't understand why they're increasing the gas on the bases. I think there's already a shockingly high amount of gas per base in StarCraft 2. And the fact that you can mine it and harvest it so quickly compared to StarCraft 1, where there is a lot of gas, but obviously it takes forever to mine because you only get 1 gas per base in StarCraft 1. It's a little bit wild to me, the amount of gas you end up with in late game a lot of the time. I always felt like it should be a bit more of a rare resource, but it isn't necessarily the case. And in fact, depending on the faction, it can somewhat often just be the minerals that runs out in late game. Pretty damn often, actually, for both Zerg and Terran. Total default gas per base increased, of course, as a result of that. And this rich Vespian gas geyser harvest return value decreased from 8 to 6. So basically, rich gases are only going to be plus 50% rather than plus 100% mining rate. Now for Zerg, obviously due to the 8 worker start, they've reduced the starting supply for the hatchery, nexus, and command center by 2 each to reflect, of course, the lower supply needed to make that early game smooth. I think you could actually lower it even more than that. A lot of people are resistant to that because they don't like the idea of automatically getting like supply blocked in an efficient opening or not for very long. I think it's fine if you went down to 3 and you drop the nexus and the command center down to 12 supply, instead they're at 13. Interestingly, though, there is this. Hatchery cost increased from 275 minerals to 300. Now, when I saw that, I thought they were reverting the queen cost. They're not. Queens are still 175 minerals. So this is, you've got nerfed queens from, they got, but that went hand in hand with hatcheries becoming cheaper from 300 to 275. Now you're reverting the hatchery change. You're not reverting the queen change. That's interesting. So basically, hatchery is going to be a little bit more expensive. Queens are still expensive. But this goes hand in hand with this. Lava periodic spawn rate increased from 10.7 to 9.5 seconds. Now, this is a change I had tentatively suggested in a video. I'd said, Zerg really struggles with lava with the 8 worker start. They need extra bases to get their production up. And if they do something aggressive, like a spawning pool first, when you've got 175 mineral queens that only give 3 lava, unlike the queens in Heart of the Swarm and Wings of Liberty that gave 4 lava per inject, you just really struggle to transition out of anything that's a bit more aggressive or has potential. You show an all-in, it gets scouted, and you pivot sideways, or just something that's a bit more aggressive. Any pool before hatchery build, especially if you go pool and gas, felt very awkward on this patch. And I was like, it might be interesting to experiment with something like this. Cool to see. I guess they're still listening. This is the second change that I seem to have perhaps influenced in the patches. It is very big though. And it's something where I was like, it would be cool to test that on the PTR and try it out. So if they were just to dump it like this and leave it, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm going to get blamed for another thing where I'm like, can we just test this first? Because I was very careful when I said this. I was like, I understand changing base Zerg lava production is like kind of massive. So you've got to be very cautious with this. In the video where I suggested this, I suggested like 3 or 4 ways you could approach the Zerg lava problem. One was just buff the macro mechanics back to what they were in Heart of the Swarm. Tried, tested, and true. Hey, you get a bit more minerals from mules. You get more lava from injecting. Getting the pool into the earlier queen is more valuable now than just having to expand as quickly. That's cool because pool first builds are also the aggressive builds. So getting the queen there, which gives you a bit more production out of it without the benefit of having another hatchery, another base to mine from, is kind of a nice balancing act. But this is the one I kind of said I'd probably like to see in action the most. I'm very curious to play with this and see how it feels. I have heard 2 Zerg players, pro players, who I've talked to a lot of different people. They told me this, the 300 mineral hatchery is with the 175 mineral queen is going to be awful for Zerg openings. I've also heard a lot of Protoss and Terran players say this lava is unstoppable. It's super overpowered and Zerg's super broken now. Who do you listen to? Who do you believe? I don't know. I am very curious to play with this and see how it feels. I think you want to play aggressive. You want to go pool first, get some queens, get out there, and take advantage of the fact that you've just got extra lava coming out behind it. Sorry, when I say pool first, I mean get aggressive without queens. So you want more hatcheries. Yeah, you're paying 25 minerals more. That's not a big deal, but more hatcheries. You don't even need to have the queen. So you could do something like a skip the queen, go straight for roach roar, and go pressure with a bunch of roaches and delay your queen quite a lot. And I think this will help offset that. It's a pretty big increase, guys. 1.2 seconds. That's pretty damn big reduction on your core overall production mechanic. Will you have the minerals to fully take advantage of it though? In many situations, I'm not quite sure. Now, obviously, they changed the spore crawler damage, guys, to 20 plus 10 biological to 20 plus 15 to help deal with the fact that mutas were very powerful in the ZVZ meta. I think it's pretty healthy for the matchup when mutas are quite powerful, so I'm not the biggest fan of this, but I think they'll still be fine, Mutalisks, even with the plus 15 biological. It just means the Mutalisks diving spores and straight up winning the game won't be as common. Carapace upgrades are cheaper. No changes here from the first PTR, guys. Zerg upgrades just get a bit easier. Nice buff for Zerg. Microbial Shroud range increased from 9 to 12. Quite a big cast range increase on Microbial. More importantly, you don't need an upgrade to cast it, which means we're actually going to get to see Microbial used a lot more They changed Microbial a lot in the last patch, but by adding an upgrade that was very lengthy and expensive to upgrade before you could cast it, it just meant it was gated to a stage of the game where it wasn't as effective. It was harder to get to. It was therefore harder for players to get used to using it, harder for them to get comfortable with it. And a few times we saw Serral, Shin, not many other players, they would use it to sometimes great effect, sometimes not very good effect, just dependent on the game. Now I think we're going to see pretty much everyone trying out Microbial Shroud and getting comfortable with this spell. Newer Parasite and Builder SCVs will only expire at structure completion. There's now an auto attack. They've done this for all the spellcasters, except for the Viper for some reason. Abduct now considers siege tanks a valid target. Yep, and I think they've actually fixed that, which is good. Overlord, speed without pneumatized carapace decreased from 0.9 to 0.85. Now that's crazy because in the previous versions, I think they went down to almost like 0.7, right? Yeah, guys, I've just looked up an old video here. Look, there's Past Pig behind me. Yeah, it was 0.7. So they've gone from the initial PTR, so they were lowering it to 0.7. And now they've gone to 0.85, so almost back to the 12 worker speed. That seems odd. That's very high. That's going to give Zerg a lot of free vision very early in the game. I think also you need to take into account on map pools how many pervert pillars there are. The little pillar where the Overlord can just safely sit above the enemy natural and see tons of what's going on unless they get a Viking or a Void Ray or a Phoenix early, or use a Stalker and Oracle as a popular one pros do to like hunt it down off the pillar. You combine that with this, that's something where definitely, you know, it goes back in the direction of just what we know from the previous live game with the 12 worker start. There's a few quality of life things where, like, you know, changelings get the same move command the Overseer has. So if your Overseer clicks in their main base, drops all your changelings, they'll automatically go there, which is cool. But there's also changeling deaths are contagious, which means the enemy just need to kill one, all the adjacent changelings will die. Whereas, of course, Rogue would send in a billion, making you click every single one unless you had splash damage units, and it was very frustrating to deal with. So this is a change to both preserve Beyond's wrists and to nerf Rogue. Mutalisk glaives now prioritize targets, and arc stop increased to 180. I believe that just means Mutalisk bounce is always going to pick a combat unit over like a building or an SCV, whereas previously I think it would just bounce to the closest viable thing. So if there's an enemy depot, it'll hit the depot. If there's a Marine and an SCV, it'll hit whatever's closer. Or it used to hit whatever's closer. Now it will pick the Marine because that's a fighting unit. Also, the arc slop has increased. The way I've had this described to me from modders and map makers is this essentially should be kind of like the, I believe it's damage point stat that got buffed for Vikings and Hydras in the recent years, where it should make it easier to shoot, move, and kind of like move and shoot very smooth, very quickly. Whereas Mutalisks previously had to kind of like stop and like a little bit, they weren't as smooth at shooting and moving, so apparently this makes them more microable. I haven't played enough games to have a feel for it. Mutas have felt really good in the games I've played, but I haven't played enough with mutas recently to fully understand the difference. I feel like I don't know how much is just placebo. It's really hard to differentiate. Terran Command Center supplies provided reduced from 15 to 13. Ghost supply increased from 2 to 3. Health reduced from 125 to 100. Attack damage changed from 10 plus 10 versus light to 15. Attack range increased from 6 to 7. So this is the Super Ghost. Movement speed reduced a little bit. Steady targeting is no longer cancelable, but it costs 50% more energy, and it always does full damage. It used to just be full damage to psionic, which would allow it to one-shot Vipers and the like. Now it does the full, which means it's back to 3-shotting Ultralisks like it used to. But you can not have anywhere near as many ghosts at the end game. And it does only have 2 rather than 4 snipes at max energy. So I really am curious to see if there's a moment in the early late game where Ultras broods are able to just basically face tank the snipes and overwhelm because there's just not enough ghosts and enough snipes. I think once you get to a critical mass with max energy, it's probably not going to matter and it's just going to be way better. But it should, I believe in theory, open up a much larger window where the ghost energy is not really high enough to deal with everything the Zerg's throwing at them. I also think the damage change is probably good just because Ghost's damage was way too well-rounded. It would just beat the heck out of just about any unit, and it felt a bit overpowered. I've heard good things about this load nearby units command, guys. Basically, every transport for every team got this, where you can press a button, it'll just scoop up nearby units. Apparently, it makes it way easier to quickly pick up units in high-pressure situations, as drop micro has always been something that non-pros struggle with really badly. They've also fixed this subgroup priority, guys. You'll notice. All right, guys, so I've just gone into Unit Tester, and as you can see, Marine Marauder is selected first. Let's actually give myself stim so I can see that as well. So as you can see, if I box these units, put them on control group 2 here, you know, control group 1, I press stim, no worries. We can tab. And you're going to notice it selects all the Marines and then all the Marauders. So you have to tab Marines, then Marauders, then Ravens, then Tanks, then Medevacs, and then back to Marines. But if you press stim, it'll stim the Marines and the Marauders, even though you need to tab one more time to go to the Marauders. That's the way it's always worked. Now, in the previous version of the PTR, they made it so you only had to tab once to get past Marines and Marauders to the next unit. Problem was, that meant the Marines and the Marauders wouldn't organize themselves separately, and you'd get like 2 or 3 Marines, 2 or 3 Marauders, you know? You'd have this weird situation where... And it would actually count them all as different subsets of units because they weren't organized. So you see, normally you might have, oh, there's banelings coming from here. You might control-click your Marines and pull them back. So the Marauders soak the damage, and the Marines are protected. But what would happen is these units would all be jumbled up in the PTR version. So you'd control-click and it would select 2 Marines, because there was a Marauder on either side of those 2 Marines in the wireframe. And you'd only pull back the 2 Marines, and you'd be like, what the hell? So I'm glad they fixed that. A lot of pros use this micro all the time of control clicking there and pulling the Marines back. So that was a big complaint. I'm glad they fixed that. All right, on to Protoss, guys. Also the supply down for the Nexus. The big one, of course, is the warp gate change. Now they've changed this. Not only does warp gate research speed up gateway unit production time, but this was 35% in the PTR. Now it's 40% in the live game. Also, they reduced the cost. So they made it in the previous PTR. They were like, hey, to make a gateway into a warp gate, you need to pay 50 minerals and 50 gas. They've reduced that to 25. A very welcome change because it was prohibitively expensive. Not only that, but there was also, in the PTR, warp gate research was put onto the Cybercore. They have removed that. There's no mention of that here because they got rid of it. Thankfully, they did get rid of it. You can upgrade it out of the Cybercore like normal rather than having to occupy your gateway with upgrading the research that you need, whilst your gateway also needs to be making defensive units to keep you safe in your openings. That was one of the stranger changes they ever did, and I don't really understand why they did it and what the intended consequence was. Warp-in time is no longer determined by slow power fields. Now, this is a pretty big one, guys, as well. Used to be if your pylon was near a nexus or a gateway, or a warp gate specifically, I should say, it would become a high power field. Essentially, it would warp in units quicker. Whereas if you had a little pylon you hid in a little corner of your opponent's base or just in the corner of the map, it would warp in units slower. And the speed for the fast warp in was 3.6 seconds. The slow warp in was 11.4 seconds. They're removing that. And now they're just like, warp in time is always 4 seconds. Slightly slower for these ones, but way faster for the ones that would have been slow before. And they're also making it so warp gate cooldown is slightly longer. Previously, when you used warp gate to warp in units, you could start warping in a zealot. And 20 seconds from when you started warping in, you could start warping in another zealot, which is very, very quick. They've slowed that down slightly, which feels fine to me. It's Stalkers actually can warp in slightly faster, as can Sentries, but Adepts and Zealots can warp in slightly slower, which is interesting. So they're making it so you can't spam Zealots and Adepts out of warp-ins as quickly. So those sort of, very common Glaive Adept or Charge Lot timings are going to be slightly weakened. They're already massively weakened, though, because you've got to pay to make warp gates, so they're kind of doubly weakened in that regard. But I think their goal here is probably just to incentivize people to use regular gateway, where you can see, because they've made it 40%, it's now only 16 seconds to build a zealot out of a gateway. That's less time than it takes a barracks to build a marine, which is 18 seconds. With a reactor, obviously 2 marines in 18 seconds, but that's a lot more setup than just making one gateway. So once you've upgraded warp gate, you get this massive just production speed increase on all these units. Adepts only 18 seconds, Stalkers only 16 seconds, Sentries 14 seconds, High Templar 26 seconds, Dark Templar 26 seconds. I've been experimenting with it today. It feels weaker because I'm really not used to it. There is a dream of optimizing a setup where, because this unit production is so efficient, maybe where we used to play 8 gateways, you could get away with 6 gateways now and have close enough production with constant rallying of units that it's similar. Problem, those units need to rally from the gateways to wherever you're fighting. If that's an attack, they've got to go all the way across the map. If that's defending a base, they've still got to get there. And when you're used to defending by warping in units into the fight, you really feel the weakness of using regular gateways. It is something which I'm committed to figuring out and getting good at and just learning to adapt to, because I think it's a fun way to play Protoss, and I would have done it anyway. But I would have done that if you gave this buff, even without nerfing the warp gate. So this could have been a much more conservative version of these changes where they just buffed the non-warp gate form without necessarily nerfing the warp gate form. Obviously, they wanted to be more ambitious here. There is still my ongoing criticism that I don't know where where's the power? Like often it's like, if we assume the game is balanced right now, that's obviously very subjective, but assuming you do, if you're taking power away from Protoss with Warp Gate nerfs, putting into this gateway here that is still not anywhere near as good as the current version of Warp Gate, but is arguably competitive or even better than this. You've got to pay for each Warp Gate version. Where else does the power come from? Okay, hallucinations are a bit easier to micro, doesn't really matter that much. Shield battery starts with 75 energy upon completion. Used to be, if you built it near a nexus, it was 100 energy. If you built it away from the nexus, it was 50 energy. They've split the difference here, so shield batteries always start with 75. A bit stronger for proxying than on the previous version of the game. It's a little worse for defending. Okay, I don't have too many thoughts on that. High Tempo Psystorm, total damage reduced from 110 to 100. So the zoning tool is becoming a little bit more of a zoning tool and even less damage. Some people absolutely abhor this. I don't know if this needed to change. I don't know. Still part of me believes that the old Psystorm could come back tomorrow, and I would be happy for it. The new version of Psystorm is very big. I think it's incredibly powerful against low-level players who struggle with such a big, high-duration, high-damage spell. They're very bad at dodging AoE, moving out of it, and knowing what to do in these situations. But even at high level, it's so good for holding off Zerg all-ins, and it does feel very much like, as Protoss, the previous Storm, I felt like I could initiate fights a little bit more. It was a little more fun in that regard, whereas it's a lot more of me moving around and just trying to bait Zergs and Terrans into attacking through my Psystorms now. And Storm always had that as one of the main ways you use it, but it does feel like it just doesn't have quite as much cool factor as the other Storm, quite as much agency. Of course, there is the argument that, hey, it's good, it doesn't kill your units as quickly, it's lessened one of the more brutal things in an already very brutal and fast-paced game that is StarCraft. That's purely subjective. I think if I could snap my fingers and make Old Storm come back, I'd probably do it, though. Disruptor now is a phantom attack, so it doesn't A-move itself to death. Sorry, I didn't really clarify that earlier, guys. So Infestors, Disruptors, Ravens. Did the Raven get it? I'm not sure if the Raven got it, actually. Did they say Raven got it? No Raven. Okay, for some reason, air units aren't getting it. Basically, if you A-move these units, they will not run in and get themselves killed. They'll stop at like 5 or 6 range and pretend they're attacking the enemy unit. And that's fine. That's totally fine. It's just a noob-friendly thing. Some people hate this. They go, hey, how about you learn how to use control groups and micro your army rather than just throwing units away? But in a game that is very kind of F2 A-move friendly, I kind of shrug my shoulders and go, whatever. You're probably still not microing your units that well if you rely on this. Now, there's also about 1,000 bug fixes and quality of life updates. Massive shout out to the community. I'm sure looking at this list, there's no way Blizzard did this all on their own. I don't know that, but I mean, come on, look at this. Surely this is a ton of map makers, modders, all sorts of people in the community, all putting in bug reports, probably also saying, hey, you could fix this by doing this and this. I mean, ever since the Balance Council came in, we've seen the community has become very active at all, passing on information to Blizzard about how to fix issues, about going, here, there's a weird behavior with this that doesn't make sense. And I haven't read through all of these, but I'm sure a lot of these are fantastic. And I won't bore you with them now because most of it would just be me going, that's an issue? What's that? Huh? You really need the people who understand these issues to break these down for you. All right, guys, so at the end of the day, to summarize all these, Warp Gate change, absolutely monumental. 8 worker start, pretty big pacing change. The big controversial question right now on the economy change is, does the 8 worker start remove a lot of the interesting openings in terms of aggression? That's what some people are saying. I think that's the big question I'll be looking at in terms of the next few weeks. Combined with, does it actually make a lot of tech plays stronger? Because some of the people who've criticized the 8 worker start, which I have obviously advocated for, I've also said that like tech units are too strong, and that's a really big problem. I'm not sure it is a big problem. Obviously, in some scenarios it can be. But I also think it could be a strength as well. Part of the lower worker start, why I advocated for it, was I would love like earlier tech plays to be a bit more of a viable option, rather than it being so much mass tier 1 units and very, StarCraft is a very tier 1 heavy game with mass expanding. So I do like the idea of those tech units being a bit stronger. You be incentivized to head towards them and to slow down your expansion rate a little bit to get that value elsewhere to open up those different paths. I still think expanding is incredibly powerful right now. It's what we've seen in the majority of pro games is still just mass expanding and trying to essentially get to the same spot they would in the 12 worker start. but there are obviously going to be so many flow-on effects that I'm curious to investigate. I think the mineral change is actually more impactful personally, and that I do think turtle styles are going to be able to survive a bit longer. If you want to sit on 3 base and delay your 4th for a long time, you get punished much less with these mineral patches than you do in the previous version of StarCraft. And I think that's super duper impactful for your turtle mech players, your SkyToss players. Also, Terrans who tend to mine out their bases a bit quicker and spam mules and stuff, I think are going to have some surprisingly prolonged 2-base all-ins with these changes, which is definitely something to keep an eye out for. Overall, I think the thing that's difficult is you got to adjust to those economy changes. Terran and Zerg, I think, will be fine. Zerg, especially with this lava increase combined with the carapace getting a bit cheaper, that sort of stuff. But obviously, Protoss players are going to be getting the short stick in terms of it's going to be the hardest relearning period, learning how to use regular gateways. That's a huge adjustment that cannot be undersold. And of course, I think most players with this being cheaper are just going to be essentially paying a tax 6-7 minutes into the game to turn all their gateways into warp gates, and they're just going to go, okay, cool. So what's the real difference at the end of the day? My warp prism warps in 0.4 seconds slower, but a sneaky pylon's a bit stronger. Like, that's a much faster warping than 11.4 seconds. But early attacks are much weaker, the warp gate style attacks, because you've got to pay for these. And you've got to pay money, which you're just losing out on either way, which is just a cost. Protoss, I think it's fair to say, has been nerfed in this patch in this current version. I still would advocate for, there to be potentially even more aggressive changes to the Protoss warp gate and recall mechanics if you're going to go in this direction, but only to do that if you're going to pair it up with a reallocation of strength. A lot of Protoss players are very angry at me in that video where I mentioned that. They're like, Pig wants to take away warp gate and recall. And I'm like, no. My point is I'm criticizing the fact that they're nerfing the heck out of warp gate without really giving enough requisite value elsewhere. Yes, these production speeds are great, but it's very hard for me to fully... Is this truly better than being able to warp in your units in the enemy base, in your main when there's Zerglings or a drop in there? That, you're going to need a lot more map control. You need more map control, more vision, more solid on the defense to not get punished for not having warp gates. So getting a few seconds extra build time in your units is good, but to min-max this, you need to build less gateways, keep constant production really efficiently, and then use that money to get more map control, get more vision, spot things earlier so you're not caught out of position, because it will be more deadly if you do not have warp gates up and running. Okay guys, so to summarize, I need to play games. I'll be playing a lot of games this week. I am going to be crossing my fingers. Blizzard's putting out a patch in a week with big changes based on what we find and what we say. This is broken, that's bad, you need to fix this, you need to fix that. If we are indeed on the negative timeline, there is not a patch in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and it goes on and on. That's going to be a very, very sad, dark day. For now, I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm just going to think positively and get out there, learn the game, have some fun trying to figure out these new things, make the most of it, and basically just focus on the zone of things that I can influence and control, and the things that I don't know anything about, aka Blizzard's intentions. I'm just not going to worry about too much as a personal choice because I don't want to stress myself out. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you guys with a bunch of cool strats games, and we'll get some guides out over the next 2 days on how to open with 8 workers so we can get you guys with some half-decent openings. Obviously, they won't be the perfect ones we're doing 2-3 years from now, but to give you solid openings for now to adjust to the changes and start getting into the flow of the new StarCraft balance. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time. Goodbye and good night.